Stories of the Sahara by San Mao. Chapter 1 A Knife on a Desert Night. When I first arrived in the desert, I desperately wanted to be the first female explorer to cross the Sahara. The thought of it used to keep me up all night back in Europe. My previous experiences traveling through various countries wouldn't be of much use since there was no civilization to speak of in the desert. After thinking it over for nearly half a year, I decided to go anyway and scope it out once I got there. Of course, I couldn't very well go without any plan whatsoever. It wouldn't do to simply strap a large cartine to my back and parachute out of the plane. So I began in Spanish territory, in the capital of the Sahara Desert, El Anoun. I found it hard to believe that this was a capital city. It was clearly just a small settlement in the middle of the great desert, with a handful of streets, a few banks, and a couple of shops. The desolated scenery and atmosphere reminded me of the towns in Western films. The usual flourishes of a capital city were nowhere to be seen. The home I rented was outside of town. It was a shabby little place, but the monthly rent was even higher than what was standard in Europe. There was no furniture. I spread straw mats on the ground as the locals did. I brought a mattress to sleep on in the other room, and with that I was all settled for a while. I did have water. There was an oil drum on the roof. Every morning around 6 or so, the city government would deliver salty water collected from deep wells in the desert. I don't know why it was so salty. You used it to wash your face and bathe. As for drinking water, you had to buy it by the bottle. Life here was unbearably lonely for me at the start. I didn't know how to speak Arabic, and my neighbors all happened to be indigenous people of the Sahara, Africans. Very few of the women knew Spanish, though the children could speak it haltingly. There was a street right in front of my house, and beyond that was the endless desert, smooth and soft, full of serene mystery, stretching out all the way to the edge of the sky. It was a yellowish-orange color. I thought the surface of the moon probably looked pretty similar to this place. I loved how the desert was stained red at sunset. Every day as the sun went down, I'd sit down on the roof until the sky was totally dark and feel an immense loneliness, out of nowhere, deep in my heart. I initially planned to rest for a while and then travel through the desert. Unfortunately, I didn't know any people, so I had nothing to do except go and hang out at the police station in the town every day. Okay, I'll admit, I had no choice. The police station had confiscated my passport. They were always trying to deport me. I paid a visit early on to the deputy director, a Spaniard. Senor, I would like to go to the desert, but I don't know how to get there. Can you help me? Desert? Aren't you in the desert right now? Why don't you lift your head up and look out of the window? He spoke without raising his head himself. No, I want to make a trip like this. I waved my hand over the map that hung on the wall and pointed to the Red Sea. He looked me up and down for almost 2 minutes. Senorita, he said, do you know what you're saying? This is not possible. Please get on the next plane back to Madrid. We don't want any trouble. I became agitated. I won't cause any trouble for you. I have enough to cover living expenses for 3 months. I'll show you. The money's right here. I grabbed a handful of dirty banknotes from my pocket and shook them at him. Fine. None of my business. I'll give you residency for 3 months. After that, you must leave no matter what. Where are you currently living? I need to register you. I live outside of town in a house with no door plate. How to explain? I'll draw a picture for you. And thus I settled down in the Great Sahara Desert. I don't want to complain repeatedly about my loneliness, but I almost couldn't get over how tough it was during that initial period and thought often about heading back to Europe. Amid that endless stretch of sand, it was so hot during the day that water could scald your hands, while night was so cold that you had to wear a heavy coat. Many times I asked myself why I insisted on staying here. Why had I wanted to come to this lone, forgotten corner of the world all by myself? As there were no answers to these questions, I continued to settle in, one day at a time. The second person I met was the retired commander of the Desert Corps, a Spaniard who had been living in the desert for most of his life and had no desire to repatriate. I asked for his advice on traveling into the desert. "Señorita, this is impossible. Consider your circumstances." I stayed quiet, but I must have obviously looked dejected. "Come and look at this military map," he said, calling me over to the wall. "This is Africa. This is the Sahara Desert. The dotted lines are roads. The rest you can see for yourself." I already knew. I'd looked thousands of times at many different maps. On the retired commander's map, apart from a few dotted lines in the Spanish Sahara, there were only the borders between countries. The rest was completely blank. "What are these roads of which you speak?" I asked. "The roads here are the tire tracks of people who traveled before. When the weather's nice, you can see them. Once the sandstorms get intense, they disappear." I thanked him and left, my heart heavy. I knew I was overestimating my abilities, but I couldn't just let it go. I'm a stubborn person, through and through. To keep from getting discouraged, I went to find some locals to ask their advice. The Sahari people are natives of this huge desert. They surely have their own ideas. There was a public square outside of town, crowded with camels and jeeps, goods and goats. I waited for an old Muslim man to finish praying, then asked him how I could cross the Sahara. This old man spoke Spanish. As soon as he opened his mouth, a crowd of young people gathered around him. "You want to go to the Red Sea?" he asked. "I have never been in my whole life. Nowadays you can fly to Europe, change planes and get to the Red Sea safe and sound. No need to cross the desert." "Yes, but I want to get there by going through the desert. Please, advice." I spoke very loudly, worried he hadn't understood. "You must go? All right then. Listen carefully. Rent 2 jeeps so you have an extra in case one breaks down. You will need a guide. Once you are fully prepared, you may as well try." This was the first time someone had told me I could give it a shot. "How much does it cost to rent a jeep per day?" I pressed. "How much for the guide?" 3,000 pesetas per day for the jeep. Another 3,000 for the guide. Then there's food and gas. Great. I added it up and figured basic expenses would be around 180,000 pesetas for a month. No, that wasn't right. I needed to rent 2 cars, so the total would be 270,000 pesetas. This didn't include equipment, gas, food, or water. I'd need at least 400,000 pesetas per month or I couldn't work. I figured the few large bills in my pocket, feeling discouraged. "It's too expensive," I said grudgingly. "I can't afford to go. Thank you." As I was about to leave, the old man said, "There's also a way to do it without spending much money." Hearing this, I sat back down again. "What do you mean?" "Go with the nomads. They are a very friendly people and travel to wherever there is rainwater. This will save you money. I can make introductions." "I'm not afraid of hardship. I can buy my own tent and camel. Please help me. I can go right away." The old man laughed. "Nobody knows when they might go. Sometimes they stay in one place for a week or 2. Sometimes they stay for months. It depends on whether their goats have enough to eat." "How long does it take for them to cross the desert each time?" "Hard to say. They are slow, probably 10 years or so. Everyone who heard this laughed, but I couldn't bring myself to join in. That day, I walked for a long, long time, all the way home to where I was staying. I traveled incredible distances to the desert just to linger in this little town, it seemed. Good thing I still had 3 months left. I might as well settle down first and then make plans. My landlord's family paid me a visit the day after I moved in. A big group of boys and girls were crowded in front of my door. I smiled at them, scooping up the smallest in my arms. "Come in, everyone," I said to them. "I have snacks for you." They awkwardly glanced at a plump girl who stood behind them. She was truly beautiful, with large eyes, long eyelashes, and very white teeth. Her skin was a light brown. She wore a deep turquoise fabric around her body and also covered her hair. She walked over and touched her hand to my face, then shook my hand. "Salam alaikum." "Salam alaikum," I said back to her. I liked her a lot. Among this group of little kids, the girls all wore long African print dresses in splashy colors, and their hair was done up in a ton of snake-like braids. They looked amazing. Some of the boys wore clothes, while others were naked. None of them had shoes on. A pungent smell emanated from their bodies. Their facial features were all very attractive, even if a bit grimy. I eventually met the landlord himself. He was a policeman who spoke excellent Spanish. "Your wife is very beautiful," I said to him. "That's odd," he replied. "You didn't meet my wife." "Then who was that plump and pretty girl?" "Ah, that is my elder daughter, Giga. She's only 10 years old." I stared at him in shock. Giga looked very mature. I would have guessed her to be around 30. I really couldn't believe it. "Señorita, you must also be a teenager, right? You can be friends with my daughter." I scratched my head, embarrassed and unsure of how to tell the landlord my age. Once I got to know Giga better, I asked her, "Giga, are you only really 10 years old?" "What year old?" she said. "You. How old are you?" "I do not know," she said. "I can only count to 10 on my fingers. We women do not care about our age. Only my father would know how old I am." Eventually, I discovered it wasn't just Chiga who didn't know how old she was. Her mother and the neighboring women didn't know numbers, nor did they care about their own ages. All they cared about was how plump they were. Plump was pretty here. Who cared about how old anyone was? Within a month of settling down, I had managed to meet many people. I had both Spanish and Sahari friends. Among them was a young Sahari man who graduated from high school, a remarkable feat. One day, he told me happily, "I'm getting married next spring." "Congratulations! Where's your fiancé?" "In the desert, living in the kaima," a tent. Gazing at his handsome views, I hoped he would conduct himself differently from his clansmen. "Tell me, how old is your fiancé?" 11 years old. I cried out when I heard this. "And you've got a high school education? Dios mío." This made him very mad. "What's wrong about this?" he said, looking at me. "My first wife was only 9 when she married me. Now she's 14, with 2 children." "What? You have a wife? How come you've never mentioned it before?" "What is there to say about women?" I glared at him. "You're planning to marry your quota of 4 wives? Muslim here can have up to 4 wives. I cannot. I do not have the money. 2 is fine for now." Not long after this exchange, Jiga went crying to her own marriage. It was customary to cry on this occasion, but if I were in her place, I would probably cry bitter tears for the rest of my life.